Hi, welcome to the second video in my series about learning how to sell vintage online. My name is Laura, and I've been selling vintage for about 10 years, always online. And in today's video, I would like to talk about deciding what types of items you want to sell when you start a vintage business. Now, if you're watching my channel, I kind of assume that your focus is going to be women's vintage fashion, or maybe it's just women's fashion or vintage fashion in general. I don't know, but my particular focus is women's vintage clothing. And what I've noticed over the years of doing this, number one, I've sold in a lot of different categories. I've sold modern clothing, men and women's clothing. I've done some kids stuff. I've sold linens, housewares, accessories, board games. I've sold a lot of different things. And for me personally, I find that what works best is that I am selling things that I am really interested in. And I think that's going to be my primary piece of advice for this video, especially if you're brand new and starting out, is try to work with things that you are passionate about or that you at least really enjoy. Um, I definitely really enjoy all of the things that I've sold for the most part. I'm not going to pretend that I haven't picked things up in the past that I later regretted. I still do that all the time. But for the most part, the things that I was picking up, I was getting because I thought they were really cool. And I think that that can be a really important component because when you're selling online, not only do you have to, like know all the ins and outs of the platforms you're selling on and how to ship things, but you have to be able to adequately describe your items to people. And, I can take a blouse and say, this is a size medium, it's red, it's made out of silk, and that's it, right? Has no flaws. That's not going to be enough for a lot. I mean, for some people, it's fine, but I don't think that that's where your bigger profits are going to be, especially when it comes to vintage. A lot of people have sort of an emotional attachment to things and they like the story behind it. And I don't always have a story behind things, but what I do know is, what era is this from? Why do I know that it's from this era? I think that people purchasing vintage are interested in those things. You have your experienced vintage buyers who are going to be looking for those things as proof that you know what you're talking about. And then you have your newbie vintage buyers who are just going to be wanting to soak up all that information. Um, so for me, having an interest in those items has been critical in being able to go down the little research rabbit holes of what zippers look like in different eras and what seams look like in different eras and what types of sleeves were popular at different points in time, et cetera, right? Um, and every single thing that you could possibly sell has these little niches, right? I mean, unless you're selling like fucking iPhone chargers. I don't think you're doing that if you're here. Um, I used to do a lot of vintage Pyrex, and there are different ways that you can tell some of the older Pyrex pieces versus the later ones. There's the maker marks, but there's also things like the thickness of the glass and like the slightly different white versus a little bit kind of creamy color. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff, right? It gets nuts. And it's super interesting, I think. Um, One of the things I see a lot is listings online where people don't really know what they're talking about. They will show a garment and say, like, oh, this is this 1960s dress. And then they show the tag and it has a union tag that didn't exist until 1974. So, they're not doing the work. And I don't know if that's because they're not interested. I don't know. Who knows what that is? But I think that it's critical that you love the thing that you're trying to sell, at least a little bit, even if it's not something you want to keep, um, because of the research aspect. But also, for me, the acquisition is like a super fun process. Listing things online can get tedious. And if my brain is not into something, or even if it's, you know, there's like questions surrounding it. Sometimes I have a hard time describing something even when I love it. And then I have a difficult time actually sitting down and writing my listings. Um, I find that a lot of people who sell secondhand and who are into vintage, a lot of those people tend to have uh, certain traits in common. One of which is like, I don't want to say that we all have ADHD, but I think that we all have that sort of hyper focus, or needing to be super interested in something to like do all the work, right? I think that's a common trait. And maybe that's a product of executive dysfunction issue, whatever, right? Maybe it's just a quirky. I also think that we can all have some hoarding tendencies, and there's a very wide scale of hoarder. Um, and if you take any offense to that, I apologize. And maybe it doesn't apply to you, but I think that a lot of us have some hoarder in us, and that can be a dangerous game to play. And especially if you're new into vintage selling, because you take all this enthusiasm and the fun of acquiring things, and then you have all this stuff in your house, and now you have to do something with it. And when you're new and you have to learn all the tedious stuff as well as do the fun parts, it can get really overwhelming very quickly. So um, be excited about what you want to sell, and then take your time with it. Don't go overboard, I would say, if you're new. I got into this very gradually because I was doing it for funsies. I was not trying to do this as a business for a very long time. For a very long time. I think that I was probably doing it as a hobby for like a year or two before I kind of fell into doing it, maybe 3 years before I fell into doing it full time. But I also fell into doing it full time because I got laid off from my job. I didn't make a conscious decision to like quit my job. I just, while I was unemployed and not finding work that I wanted to do, I was doing this. And then eventually I was like, I think I can just kind of keep doing this. So that's what I did. And I feel like that worked out well for me. I can be too impulse driven. I'm kind of like, I'll go and I'll buy all the things for the new hobby or project, like, and spend a ton of money immediately. And then after a week, never touch those things again. That's me. And I feel like that's a lot of us, right? So be passionate about the items that you want to sell. One of the pieces of advice that I hear so frequently in reseller communities is the don't leave money on the table thing. And I hate that advice because the idea behind it is that every single thing that you see has the potential to be the thing that could sell for $10,000. There are so many different ways to make money in this business, and there are so many areas that you can gain a lot of knowledge in. But the people who are most successful in those areas are the people who have a lot of knowledge and experience in them. Um, I used to know about a guy who specialized in selling like old sporting goods, like specifically baseball bats was a big thing he was into. I don't know shit about baseball bats. He would know which ones were older and worth more money and the kind of wood and what was dense, right? I don't know anything about that. I don't want to know anything about that. And I do admit that like hearing other people talk about those types of things, now I'm in a thrift store, I see a baseball bat, I'm like, oh, I wonder if that's worth $400. But I don't want to invest the time to learn in that. And I have more than enough opportunity to make nice money from things that I am interested in. Um, I've done over the years clothing, housewares, linens, all these different things, and I've truly been interested in them. And the only reason that I've narrowed down to strictly women's vintage clothing at this point is it just kind of happened. Selling on Whatnot has really made a change in the way that I source things. Um, and also, I think I just find a sufficient amount of women's vintage clothing, and I'm able to sort of do my business that way. The things that I've been able to source throughout my career have kind of changed because of what's available to me. The thrifting market has changed drastically in the time that I've been doing this. So, items that you are interested in, and then the whole don't leave money on the table thing, the way that I like to look at that and reframe it is more, don't worry about leaving money on the table because there are so many opportunities to be successful in this. Also, the way that you're defining success, to me, like the fact that I can do this full time and pay my bills mostly on time is success for me, because there are definitely some comforts that I give up by not having a corporate America kind of job. But there's also a lot of things that I am so grateful to have because I don't have a corporate America job. Um, I would say start off slow don't overwhelm yourself with a whole bunch of inventory. Get some stuff that you love, and 10 items, 15 items, whatever, and go through the process of trying to create listings for them. Because when you start selling, learning all of the different ins and outs of the platforms you're selling on, learning all the different things about shipping, all of that is going to also take up a lot of brain space and time and can feel very overwhelming. So if you go at it really slowly, like, okay, today I'm just going to take this dress, I'm going to write a listing on whichever platform I'm choosing to do, and I'm going to take it one step at a time and get through this listing for this dress, right? We haven't even talked about like photography, all these things, right? There's so many different aspects to selling. So don't overwhelm yourself in the beginning. And in fact, if you have been a collector for a period of time of whatever it is, you can start off with going through just what you have in your home and deciding if there are things that you would like to let go of and try and sell those things. Um, the other thing to think about with items is being able to ship them, store them, and then potential issues with customers. I think that every single category of item, you will find people complaining about customers and the problems that they have with these items. But I have very few problems with customers. And so, talking about, let's say, shipping an item, first of all, right? Shipping a dress is really pretty, especially depending on the dress. Like if you're shipping some big like ball gown, okay, that's going to be a little bit more of a process. But if you're shipping just an everyday dress that you can wear casually, it's pretty easy. You fold it up, you put it in a poly mailer, make sure that it's not going to get drenched if it falls in a pool. Uh, Probably I go overboard there too, but and then you ship it off. You don't have to worry about it breaking. You don't have to worry about it getting bent, none of that stuff. If you are selling glassware, there's a whole different process there. You have to be able to confidently package that item so that it will not break. And we'll talk about shipping and stuff in another video. If you are, sometimes like the size of an item is critically important because once you go over certain dimensions, the shipping prices skyrocket. Shipping is a big factor in determining what you're going to sell, I think, because shipping can be complicated. It doesn't have to be, but it feels complicated in the beginning for sure. Another thing is very valuable items. Personally, I'm not super comfortable with really valuable things. Like I do not seek out designer items like Chanel or what, if I find something in a thrift store, I'm probably going to pick it up, but I don't go to estate sales where there's like really expensive designer collections and spend a lot of money on it because I don't know enough about designer pieces and authenticity and being able to prove that to a customer. And so I don't want to risk having any kind of issues there where somebody's claiming something is not authentic because I don't know what I'm talking about. Could I take the time to learn? I could, but there are very few times where I've come across those types of pieces. Also, the type of pieces that I would be interested in as far as designer, especially if I have to pay a lot of money for them, it's like a very specific type of niche, and it's just hasn't been my thing. Designer purses for sure, not my thing. A lot of authenticity issues around those types of items. Jewelry, I don't know. I mean, costume jewelry, cool. I'm fine with that. Fine jewelry, I don't know anything about, and I also don't have any interest in learning all of the things to be able to, again, sort of, you know, um, give a buyer confidence that I know what I'm talking about and that this is an authentic item. So those are some things with, if you sell an expensive piece of gold jewelry to someone for, let's say, $400, and they open some sort of dispute or have a claim, and then they return the item to you, um, I don't know. I was going to say that there's a chance that they return like the incorrect item to you. That's getting a whole bunch into like our customers bad people, and I generally feel like customers are not scamming. There are certainly instances where that happens. We can talk about that in another video too, but the risk is much higher. If I'm super confident about what I'm selling and I have a whole process and whatever, then great. I just don't necessarily have that for certain categories of items. Another thing that I have heard that there can be a lot of scam issues with specifically is electronic items. People who are selling computers or, iPhones, things like that. There are a particularly high number of cases of scams and fraud from customers on that side. And I do believe that that seems legitimate. Again, I don't sell that type of stuff, but the horror stories that I've heard with a lot of those things, there's so many. So again, if you're watching my channel, that's probably not what you're into. Um, but these are all things to kind of consider, and also reasons why it's important to take it slow, because there's no way that you are going to be able to know about most of these things to be able to take those things into consideration when you're just starting. Unfortunately, a lot of these things are just learning experiences. Um, packaging breakable items can be a very painful learning experience. I fortunately was incredibly paranoid about it, and I had a lot of experienced people in my little network on Instagram when I started selling that. So I was able to kind of reach out to them. The first person I ever sold breakable items to was another vintage seller. And I literally sent her photos of her item prepackaged. And I was like, is this okay? Do you think it's going to make it? Because I was so nervous about it. So there's all these things to take into consideration. And again, it sounds overwhelming, but that's why you're going to start with just a few items and things that you're really excited about. If those things are not breakable and are very flexible and small, that's even better. Because when it comes to shipping, that's going to work in your favor while you learn all of the ins and outs of shipping as well. So I think the last part of this, maybe for now at least, is storage. I work out of my apartment. Not ideal. Part of the reason that I do that, as to the extent that I do, is because I am also a very out of sight, out of mind person. So I cannot have a storage unit because we're going to be in big trouble with my little hoardy tendencies if I get a storage unit. So everything is in my apartment. Um, it's relatively easy to store clothing. I can fold it up, put it in tote bins, right? It's out of the way, it's safe. It would be super easy to store things like jewelry. Getting into like dishware becomes a little bit more tricky. Getting into items, even like shoes, can take up more space and you have to store them a little bit more carefully. Vintage hats, you can't squash them in a tote bin. There's a lot of things. So what does your storage space look like? But a lot of that will sort of evolve over time too. My inventory management system used to not exist. It used to be like, oh yeah, that shirt's in this pile over on the chair. When it sold, I knew exactly where it was. Now I have like tote bins and numbers and all sorts of shelves and stuff, and that evolves as your business evolves. So don't worry about that kind of stuff yet. And even though I'm going to talk about it in another video, I will say also right now, don't worry about things like a lot of fancy equipment. I still use my iPhone to do all my photos. I do have photo lights, but that's evolved over time. I do have a dress form that A, evolved over time, but B, I also found it for $10 at a stoop sale in the city. So that was a pretty no-brainer kind of situation. But that's all stuff again that takes up space in my friggin' apartment, is this dress form. And I have like a half torso male mannequin thing. And then I have like a head mannequin for taking photos of hats that I almost never use. But all this stuff starts taking up space. It can take up money if you're spending money on it. So go slow and easy. I don't even know if I've touched on all of the points that I wanted to touch on, but I've recorded this video 42 times and then hated it and then recorded it and then not posted it. So this is where we're going with it for now. And I hope that you found this helpful. And of course, if you have any questions about anything, please feel free to put them below. I will continue with this series because I think it's really fun and informational for people. And I enjoy sharing knowledge, and hopefully, I'm giving you the perspective of like a very real, like everyday person. I'm not being fancy. I'm not like, you can make $10,000 in a month, because you probably can't. I'm sorry to tell you. Those are all very unrealistic expectations, in my opinion. But slow and easy and fun, right? Thank you so much for watching this. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you again soon.